I want to welcome everybody to the third of our studies this weekend. And this is the first of two presentations that I'll be doing. Thank you. Let's open with a word of prayer. Holy God, we thank you for your watch care over us. We know that we are living in momentous times. Despite our fears and our worries, even our confusion, we ask that you would help us to have confidence in you, that holy angels would be around us, and that the Holy Spirit would give us comfort, that you are doing your will in us and through us. In Jesus' name, amen. For some time now, I've been speaking about my role in the Sunday Law message. I guess it shouldn't surprise me, but it always does. The more information is given, the more people seem to be confused. And every answer that's given just generates more questions. I hope, like myself, that you're not worried. But I know that's not true because many of you talk about your fears. Many people are taking the answers that we give very personally. I say that not to judge anybody, but it's a living reality now that the theory of these messages, the message of Daniel 11, is now affecting us personally, individually, in a way that many people didn't realize. And that we are being caught by surprise. One of the elements of this, which I've addressed specifically in the last two camp meetings, South Africa and Germany, is my involvement or my approach in the delivering of this message to God's people. So I assume everybody has watched those camp meetings. Because if you have, then I hope that you can see that the presentations that Elder Terry has given at this camp meeting are just a further development, not only of her previous messages, but they have begun to address people's concerns or questions. As we were preparing for this camp meeting, I say she and we deliberately, we tried to discuss an approach that would help the questions that members have. I've already spoken about this issue, the issue of angels. And in our preparation for this camp meeting, we discussed the subject of angels and identifying who they are and what their message was. And the result of that conversation was the study that Elder Terry gave earlier today. We were well aware that it would spark further questions and maybe even discontent. But I don't want us to become distracted on that subject. I believe she made it really clear that there is a single message. That at the time of the end, there's a message to both God's people and humanity at large, or in general, to prepare for the end of the great controversy as it exists here on this planet. We call that the second advent. If you read Millerite history, you know that they were fully versed in this idea, this understanding. What we have done, following in their footsteps, is develop that message about the end of the great controversy. And as we go to the Bible, we see these various angels with these various messages. So I understood the main point that she wanted us to see is that whether you look at any specific individual, they're all teaching the same message. And when you go to a specific event or time period, you can clearly see the role that these individuals have taken. You don't like the word taken, we could use the word fulfilled. Now, I and she knows that many of us have this idea that Elder Tess was the third angel. And I know that people have differing ideas about angels. But many members, including myself, believe and have taught for years that the angel of Revelation 18 as portrayed even in early writings, is a work that brings power to the work of God. So this is early writings, page 277 in the English. And the chapter title in early writings is called The Loud Cry. And I think it's a movement position that this loud cry is the work of the second angel that occurs in the time period of the Sunday law. Whether you go to Revelation 14 and 18, or if you go to early writings. You could even go to the Great Controversy and see the same truth. So we're all familiar that just before 2014, a message of the impending Sunday law was given to this movement. And for whatever reason, when the time was fulfilled and we entered into that dispensation in 2014, the message of the Sunday law had been fulfilled, but it had not got power. Depending on what story you want to tell, we can explain why it didn't have that power. It took 4 years and a bit for someone in the movement to be raised up to explain the Sunday law. To prove it. to give power to the Sunday law message. Seems to me, to us, Elder Terry and myself, as she clearly taught in her last presentation, that it was Elder Test that was raised up to give clarification to the Sunday law message. Which she did at the Loud Cry in 2018. We call it the Midnight Cry, but I want us to all know that it's the Loud Cry. In that work, she gives power to the third angel's message. A message that she never gave. She only demonstrates and proves or verifies. And I think if you were to read early writings, the chapter called The Loud Cry, page 277, the chapters preceding, the chapters before and after, in combination with the Great Controversy and Revelation, that this story or this prophecy was fulfilled in that history. If that's the case, then she takes the role of the second angel. I just want to quote from early writings. I'll paraphrase. There were many angels going to and fro between heaven and earth. This is before the event, because they were preparing for something. Then a mighty angel is seen, who is given a specific message in heaven. That angel goes from heaven to earth, and I quote, to unite their voice with the third angel, and to give power and force to the message. The message of the third angel. Paraphrasing. This angel that's in heaven, that's told to come to the earth, whose voice is different to the third angel, but they work in unity. This angel had great power and great glory given to it. And as that angel descended, that glory lit the earth. I would suggest in that history, if you can remember the events, just the story, you'll see that when Elder Tess came to this movement, she had power and she had glory, and she lit this movement. She brought light to this movement in a way that hadn't happened for many, many years before. The light which attended this angel went everywhere. It says penetrated everywhere. And to me, the word penetrate means forces its way into every corner. And then it says, and the angel cried. So this cry at the beginning of the sentence is described as light. That's nothing new. We know that rain is a symbol of a message, as is light. And that message penetrates throughout this movement everywhere. No one is left with an option to reject that. So that light that goes everywhere is the message that is given with a loud or a strong voice. And we know what that message is, because you're all familiar with this chapter. It's been taught many times in the past. And the message is, Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen. That's what we were taught this morning. Now, when people have discussed the work of Elder Tess, or myself, or Elder Jeff in the past, many have fallen into the ditch of making things very literal. Several years ago, in order to better understand not only the placement of angels, but the work each of us has to do, this line that we all believe in, accept, that goes from the time of the end to the close of probation to the second advent, it was explained with two models. One of them ended up being called the 7 steps of salvation. And the second model was from Matthew 13, the agricultural model. The 7 steps of salvation has received very little attention, and I'm not sure why. But the agricultural model has received a lot of attention. And I think it's received a lot of abuse. What I mean by that is people have misused that model or that prophecy and have tried to use it to do a work that it was never intended to do. I've been misquoted on this issue. And it's related to the idea of identifying wheat and tares. That study was never designed to do that. So those two models were used to better understand, I'll just call it our line, and Elder Terry used those models earlier today to try to explain the roles or work of these angels. And because in that study, the second and the third angel are identified as appearing in 2001, what people have done is try to place Elder Tess on that line in 2001. This was a question that someone asked. It was part of a larger question. But I think Elder Terry was really clear today that the arrival of the second angel in 2001 was whom? Who did she say it was? Question to the congregation here. Elder Jeff? Yes? They're all okay, so we've got a few people saying yes. Elder Jeff, she identified Elder Jeff to be the arrival of the second angel in 2001. And that seems to have confused people. Because people will say, I thought someone else was the second angel. And when you try to do that, you have to put aside common sense and just do some mental gymnastics to try to get things to work. Elder Tess is relatively young, so we have to check that she was even born in 2001 as an example. And we do all of that based upon the history, the life history, the biography of William Miller. Now, I'm not trying to criticize people when they take that approach. But it seems to me that when I heard her say that Elder Jeff was the second angel that announced the fall of Babylon. That he had defined Babylon. He had defined its sin, and he had demonstrated its fall. And I think if you go back to those messages, if you're able to, that you can see that in his ministry. And then if you jump forward, as we did this morning, Elder Tess is going to stand up at the loud cry. And not only explain the Sunday law message, she speaks about the complete fall of Babylon. And Elder Terry explained who and what Babylon is and was. And I think we're all familiar enough with the message of 2018 to understand what that fall was. So I hope that answers at least partially some of the questions that we received on angels, because got a lot of questions about angels. I didn't want to, at this presentation, to develop any additional thoughts, really. But I do want to say that from the time of the end to the second advent, I know we have various Sunday laws, but we all know that there's this concept of the first and the last, that if you just take the Sunday law, we'll call it the Sunday law of the priests, making it the loud cry for the priests. I'm not sure why people struggle with the idea that Elder Tess was the second angel. It's empowerment. She meets all the criteria. Both when you look at inspiration, where it identifies what that message is and what the angel does, and you look at what she taught. So these are repeating or recurring themes, these various Sunday laws. So we all know that we can take that line or that history and bring it into our present history. But it's also a continuum. It's also one line. So if we were to take it as one line, because Ellen White is not going to give us any clue about these repeating patterns in the way that we use them. She just does not do that. So think about the line that we have. We call it the line of the 144,000. And what are we being taught? That before the Sunday law, the one that many of us believe we are now in, and the rest of us believe that we're about to enter into, one thing that we should all be able to agree on is that a message was given to God's people, us, you, that Babylon completely fell before so that message was given 6 years ago, and that message was given as a statement of something that had already happened. So long before the Sunday law that we're now in or about to enter into, depending on your view, Elder Tess was raised up to tell us that Babylon had already fallen. That's a line of continuum, if I can use that term. But it's also going to be used as a repeating pattern. Because the message will come from amongst us in the future that Babylon has fallen, has fallen. And when that message comes, it will unite its voice with the Sunday law message or the voice of the third angel. And give power to that message. So I want us to see that it's a repeating pattern, but also a single line. You can go to a different scenario and try to make Elder Tess or myself or Elder Jeff a different angel. But the study that was given to us this morning was not just some random story about angels. It was given in the context of the issues that are presently with us in this movement regarding the Sunday law question. So I'm sure I haven't answered everybody's question about angels. But I hope I've answered most of them to at least to some people's satisfaction. So I'm going to ask the question, did Elder Terry say that Elder Tess was the second and I was the third? And the answer is yes. They asked for an explanation. Hopefully I've given that now. Someone says they're completely confused now. And they asked the question, is Elder Terry saying that Elder Tess and myself are both the second angel? I don't think she said that. So I'm going to ask Elder Terry directly now. The third angel, are we expecting the third angel to come? I didn't think you said that. Are you able to answer that question? Are we expecting someone to be raised up who we're going to call the third angel sometime in the future? So just people online, Elder Terry's in the congregation and she's going to answer my question. So you won't be able to hear us, so be patient with me. Go ahead. I can hear you, but
Years ago, the third angel arrived in 2001. But the third angel is already here.
so the agricultural model, I believe, as Elder Terry explained earlier today, showed that the third angel arrived in 2001. So the third angel is already here. Elder Terry is not expecting the third angel to come sometime in the future. So the second part of the question was the empowerment of the third angel. Is that still to come? I think I've answered that question with early writings, page 277. The loud cry, the third angel's message will be empowered. Elder Terry, are you saying who the third angel is? Her answer was yes, she is. It's Elder Parminder myself, she said. I think she was explicit about that today. But maybe it's taken this questioner by surprise, and maybe others, that they wanted just confirmation. So I'll have a go at the next one. This person feels that the waymarks are being pushed into the future. I didn't get that impression that they were. So I assume this person is asking this question based upon previous movement studies by other teachers, or they're being, or Elder Terry is changing her own waymarks. I want to clarify that question. Elder Terry, are you moving any waymarks now than you had spoken about over the past 24 months, 2 years?
Not to my knowledge.
So she said no. Often when something is taught, it's misunderstood. And when clarification is given, it looks like something new is being taught. So Elder Terry is saying she's not moving any waymarks from any message that she's given. I've just randomly said the last 2 years. Actually, I shouldn't say randomly because it's not random. I went back 2 years to include the time when she was developing this message. To when it first got delivered, here in Fiji, in fact. Don't know if we remember that. So the rise and fall of the 6th and 7th kingdoms. This is the subject of, I don't call it controversy, but of discussion in our movement. Oh, sorry, have you moved any of that? The rise and fall of the 6th and 7th kingdom? There's been no shift on that either. They have not moved. We used to say that the fall of the king of the south begins at Panium. We'll go with that. I'm going to rephrase that. We used to say that at Panium begins the fall of the king of the south and the 6th kingdom. that fall continues to the Sunday law, to the seventh kingdom. Is that changed?
Yes and no. The sixth kingdom is the glorious land.
So, as this message has been developed, the simple answer would be there's no change. But as the message develops, it can appear that it is changing. As further details are explored. The sixth kingdom is the United States.
The seventh kingdom is the king of the north. None of that's changed. United States and the king of the north.
Sixth kingdom is the United States. The seventh kingdom is the king of the north. Is the United States.
Trumpism.
We'll say, I'm going to use two phrases, United States, and another phrase is Trumpism. Again, if you don't add detail, you can get wrong ideas. And as soon as you give more detail, it looks like things are changing. Okay, we're done.
That's Sunday.
All that happens at the Sunday law, and that has not changed. And that's on the line with 5 waymarks that we call Sunday law, close of probation, second advent. So it would be that Sunday law. Okay. And the king of the south.
On the line of pagan Rome, we mark the demise of the king of the south of Panion.
So from the line of pagan Rome, as we were taught today in those 2 presentations, the fall of the king of the south begins at Panium. That no change.
That detail wasn't given in today's study, but the king of the south is also part of Egypt and will fall at this worldwide Sunday.
So Elder Terry didn't go into the details of it, but she began to lay the groundwork in her 2 presentations. I call it groundwork, but we should all be aware that she was repeating studies that are more than 10 years old. Which is something that I've been recommending that teachers in our movement should be doing. Go back to those older studies and begin to relearn them and teach them with what we understand today. And as soon as you do that, as Elder Terry demonstrated, I think clearly today and yesterday, that what many of us have either forgotten or we've not been in the movement, so we don't even know because we've stopped teaching these things for a long time now. That what we call the close of probation is in fact what is the another term for the close of probation that we were taught in these two presentations. Loud? So we're going to call it the Sunday law. And some people have called it the worldwide Sunday law. And others have used the term universal Sunday law. So I think it's important for us to both remember that and to learn it anew if we didn't know. So this was not an attempt to confuse anybody, but to clarify. So Elder Terry, myself, we will end up explaining it in a way, hopefully to clarify things, but that can become confusing. Because now we're going to say there are two Sunday laws. And people are going to say, we never heard that before. But the point is that you have heard that before, or it's been taught that before. In the distant past. And because when those studies were given, they were very theoretical, sometimes the impact of what they actually meant didn't fall upon us. We didn't understand the implications. So I want us to be clear that the idea of having two Sunday laws, we can call it, well, I'll call it and I'll check, the United States Sunday law and the worldwide Sunday law. Are those terms okay? Elder Terry agrees with those terms. She used the phrase point and period. That's one thing she spoke about. And then she reminded us. And those of you who have studied Ellen White's material closely extensively will be familiar with a problem in her writings. Which you may not have fully understood until now, today. That sometimes when she says Sunday law, we need to translate that into close of probation. Which I'm sure will change things in your mind about where to place things. So this is not a new thing, what I'm about to say. And so as things develop, it should not catch you by surprise. Most people's concept or idea of the time of trouble is a time period where the world is turned upside down and is being destroyed. It's collapsing. That the plagues are falling. And we have this, I think we have this idea in our mind with the phrase, he shall come to his end. King of the North. None of that, all of that is correct. But there's another story. Not a story of failure, but a story of success. The close of probation marks the point when the United States, the King of the North, is at its zenith, its high point. It's then where it really takes control of the whole world. For a short period of time. I can't reiterate strongly enough that none of this is new. As soon as you consider that, when you consider the fall of the King of the South, its wound, its death, the way we lay out that death has to take into consideration both the waymark that we call Sunday law and the waymark that we call close of probation. Or that we would call the United States Sunday law and the worldwide Sunday law. Want to add anything? So, in an earlier study that Elder Terry has given, I think it was at the beginning of the year. I think it was called the Deadly Wound. The Deadly Wound. So when you look at the board work that she did for that study, and you compare that to the board work that she did at this CAT meeting, some people might suggest there's a contradiction. In that study, when it comes to the King of the North, King of the South, she said the death of the King of the South was now, or 2024. A couple of weeks later at this CAT meeting, she's saying it's what we call the close of probation or the universal worldwide Sunday law. And what's thrown people is that when you look at the sixth and seventh kingdom, you can come to those same conclusions. And on the boardwork, she wrote complete. So the question is, if the death is complete last year, how can the death still be in the future? You have a go at that one.
Back in the past, we identified the change from the King of the South to Egypt.
In the past, we spoke about the change from the King of the South to Egypt.
Russia,
Are you referring to Daniel 11 when you mean King of the South to Egypt? So if you go to Daniel 11, we know that Egypt can be identified as the King of the South in history. But we use those terms separately in those last 6 verses. King of the South was the Soviet Union or Russia. Egypt is the world.
Daniel, the King of the South, becomes the world. It becomes part of the world. And that's what Russia is today. It's just part of the world that is being called to come to bow the knee to Trump.
So when people give me answers, sometimes I change them slightly, which some people don't find frustrating. So we appreciate that this information or these ideas may be new. And that many of us think that by the time you get to the end of verse 40, everything is done and dusted with respect to the King of the South. And at one level, the answer is yes, it is. And that's what that graphic was in, I'll give you the date for it. in the January 4th studies. The death is complete. Is that correct?
The king of the south ceases to be the antagonist of the king of the north.
So another way to say that, these two kingdoms that are fighting, north and south, in the January 4th study, and according to the Time of the End magazine, and in agreement with what most of us understand, this fight between the North and the South comes to its end at what we call the Sunday Law. But that's not the end of Russia. There's more, if I call it pain, there's more to come. There's more for it to lose. So when the United States then takes on Egypt, Russia is part of Egypt, it's part of the world. And it's only when we get to that point, which we call close of probation, and I guess now we're also calling the Universal Sunday Law, we would mark the complete end of Russia. Is that accurate? When you do that, you have to be careful what you mark as a death, when what you're seeing. So there are people in the movement who have said, when you go from verse 40 to 41, when the king of the south stops becoming an antagonist or someone who fights against the king of the north, the south should be dead. And last year, Russia doesn't look dead. So therefore, last year could not have been the Sunday law. It must be in the future. What Elder Terry is saying, without defining the fulfillment of what the death was last year, except that she did, but people haven't seen that as a legitimate death. He's saying that the death that you're looking for in the future, not at a different Sunday law. I mean, the US Sunday law moving into the future. but it's at the worldwide Sunday law. And once you take that into consideration, it will help us to understand what happened last year and what's about to happen in the future. Is anything right? The deaths last year, so we're all clear. How are you defining that?
Death of Navalny and the work of his wife Julia, promoting the memoir and keeping that narrative alive.
So it was the death of Navalny. Is that correct? And the work of his wife in keeping his message alive. That is the death that's being marked. And this is not like being thrown as a gauntlet or a challenge to anybody. Don't see it that way. This is not being raised as a challenge to anybody. It is just an explanation that if that is the case, then the death, as many of us imagine Russia to experience, its future fulfillment isn't just some sleight of hand like a magician does. It's identified in verse 42. In the story of that final last hour, which we call the time of trouble, but which is also the beginning of the Sunday law history for the world. It's just for a long time we've never viewed it that way. And that would explain why we're not seeing what we're expecting now. But it's a future event. Not because waymarks have been moved into the future as was suggested. Those waymarks are already there. We've just forgotten about them. And we haven't been careful in laying out the rise and fall of these kingdoms. The rise of the king of the north and the fall of the king of the south. Okay, we've run out of time. I'm sorry if I didn't answer your question. We have a full day to go. Plenty of time for all of us to think about the presentations that we've had. and we'll meet again tomorrow. So I'm going to close with prayer. And as we did in the last study, we're going to turn the camera around and we're going to have a congregational hymn. Let's pray. Holy God, we thank you that we can come together to study your word. We know that you want us to be in unity above all things. But achieving unity is elusive. Is difficult. As we try to do this difficult work, help us not to have a partisan spirit, and help us to go back into our past as we have been directed to this weekend. And try to reevaluate our present history with those stories from the past. Pray that you be with us and guide us. Be especially with Elder Terry. In Jesus' name, amen. So if you please stay with us as we sing our song.